Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're going to continue our possible mortal servants of the Chaos Gods series. These are units introduced in Warhammer Fantasy, the End Times and Age of Sigmar that could possibly be introduced into the Total War Warhammer series. We've already spoken about the fast-moving and skirmishing units of Slaanesh and the bloodthirsty warriors of Khorne, but now we look towards Grandfather Nurgle and his mortal servants. You might expect that Nurgle's forces will generally be quite slow, and yes, that is indeed true, but interestingly enough, there are a few units in Nurgle's armies, demon and mortal, which would be considered quite fast. Let's start things off with a mostly unexpected unit. I'm of course talking about Chaos Ogres of Nurgle. While Chaos Ogres were more commonly seen in an undivided sense, it is the Chaos Ogres of Nurgle which saw a more of a highlight in the last remaining days of Warhammer Fantasy, specifically through the Tamukhan campaign. Of course, like their uncorrupted selves, these are a monstrous infantry, but being powered up by Nurgle makes them even tougher. They are a frontline monstrous unit, very much in the same way as a moving wall of flesh. While it has been seen that Chaos Ogres can be devoted to any of the four main Chaos Gods, it makes more sense to have them devoted to Nurgle, and to Nurgle alone, as this would be a far more thematic unit for the Plague God. It's unlikely that if mono-god units were introduced that we'll see Plague Ogres of Nurgle at launch, as we'd obviously have to wait for an Ogre DLC first, but I believe that this unit needed to be explained first, as it was actually relatively unknown to a lot of people I spoke to. But with that being said, let's move on now to a more well-known unit, the Putrid Blight Kings. Very similar to that of the introduced Khornate units, the Putrid Blight Kings were introduced in the End Times, a decently powerful melee infantry unit which was able to use an assortment of different weaponry. It was most common to see them with sword and board, dual wielding, often one-hand weapon and a mutation, or finally with a great weapon. This was one of those mixed units, which in theory for Total War Warhammer could be split up into 3 individualized units, as obviously mixed units, especially with different weaponry, don't tend to work too well in regards to stat and balancing, as obviously some weapons would have the armor piercing special rule, damage dealer, it really depends on the type of weapon itself. Again, splitting up the units itself does indeed make it easier to flesh out the roster, as unfortunately Nurgle didn't really have that many mortal units introduced in Warhammer Fantasy, the End Times or even Age of Sigmar. Another monstrous option would be the Bile Troll of Chaos. Yes, I know, it's another troll unit, but this one is wholly devoted to Nurgle. This means that the Bile Trolls of Chaos are quite durable, able to withstand a lot of punishment whilst also dealing it themselves. Their benefit on the tabletop was that their short-range vomit attack would do more damage potentially than that of the normal trolls. I'd say personally that they should be able to do this vomit attack constantly, very similar to that of miners with blasting charges, giving the forces of Nurgle some much needed basic range. Nothing too spectacular of course, but every little bit helps. Those were essentially the basic units that could be added in for Nurgle. However, there are a few other possible ones which we'll go over right now. First, of course, would be the Pestigors. Now, there's not much we can actually say about the Pestigors themselves, as we more or less know that Games Workshop have been hinting that they will get reworked eventually, and their last proper iteration was so long ago, they were basically just Gors with poison attacks. However, we have seen the Gors of Tzeentch and the Gors of Slaanesh being reworked as of late, so it's only a matter of time until the Pestigors get reworked too. As a quick note, yes, I forgot about the corn gores in the corn video, and honestly it's for the exact same reason as the Pestigors. We still haven't seen them be reworked by Games Workshop, so we'll have to wait a while. The next is going back to the Putrid Blight Kings, but in Age of Sigmar they have a variant riding atop of rotflies. This would be a flying monstrous cavalry unit for the forces of Nurgle. We've already seen one in a previous video when we spoke about the units known as Plague Drones of Nurgle, and it could be assumed that these would act in a very similar way, however do much more damage as it is an elite unit riding upon the flies and not some basic plague bearers. It could also be that the rotflies themselves could be able to drop bombs, very similar to that of the Pterodon riders in the Lizardmen army roster. These units, just like the Plague Bearer variant, would be extremely fast, and would be considered the fastest units in all of Nurgle's roster. You'd be able to fly around the battlefield and do some big damage. The extra benefit is that they're also Nurgle aligned, so they won't take too much damage and will be able to take a lot of punishment. These in theory should be one of the, if not the, actual strongest flying monstrous cavalry unit. Lastly, we'll look towards a potential unit which would be new to Total War and to all the Warhammer franchise. What you're seeing on screen right now is one of 3 characters added in during the end times, each of them with their own unique mount of this style, known as the Pox Mageth. These characters themselves will all have their own dedicated videos in the future, but right this moment I am specifically talking about this mount. This is a huge, monstrous mount, which could possibly serve well for the forces of Nurgle. Not only would these have some sort of range capability, as again, which is very common with Nurgle, they'll be able to vomit, but it could provide some ground-based monstrous cavalry which could move relatively quickly, meaning that the speed issue for Nurgle will be negated in a certain way. The majority of the army will still move quite slowly, but it's always quite handy to have something which could flank around enemy units. If your army has no flanking capabilities whatsoever, then it would kinda limit your potential damage output or change up your playstyle very drastically. But with that, we've spoken about the possible mortal units for the forces of Nurgle, but let's move on now to possible lords and heroes choices. First, of course, we're going to talk about the Chaos Sorcerer of Nurgle. Its role in Total War Warhammer would be exactly what the Chaos Sorcerer Lord already does. However, instead of being clad in a full suit of armor, the character itself is more reminiscent of a Doomsayer. This, in my opinion, just fits the whole Nurgle theme much better. You're not really expecting many Nurgle-specific spellcasters to be clad in an iron suit of armor, well, chaos armor to be in fact. Instead, they should be wrapped in rotting clothes, looking like peasants who have taken to Nurgle's rot. This is just much more thematic, and since this is a Nurgle-specific spellcaster, each of them would have access to either the Lore of Nurgle or the Lore of Death. It's easy enough to introduce these characters as either lords or heroes. A basic reskin can also make them into 2 different characters. Next, we'll look at 2 characters at the exact same time, the Lord of Blights and the Lord of Plagues. Both of them could serve as a lord choice or a hero choice, as aesthetically they are pretty much the same, the only difference is the different weapon choice, but essentially they are just melee characters, which would easily replace the basic Chaos Lord. Again, we'll likely get a standard Chaos Lord too, covered in green armor, but these just look the part much more. It is rather important if we're going into monogod factions that the aesthetic is kept as uniform as possible, not in the sense of every warrior covered in chaos armor, but if we're going to spend 10 minutes or so talking about Nurgle's forces, their lord and hero choices are much better served looking like this than they would in just basic chaos armor. And finally, the Harbinger of Decay, which could work as an interesting hero choice. a character type which could be focused around buffing the forces of Nurgle, but also landing debuffs on the enemy forces. I believe back in the days of Warhammer Fantasy this was used as a spellcaster, so instead it could even be used as a Chaos Sorcerer Lord for the forces of Nurgle. It's a grim looking mini which itself has aged rather well, so still is a quite thematic look in terms of Nurgle inspired. Of course, despite all these units, we can also more or less expect the basic reskins, the units that we already have for Chaos Undivided, just tinted in green. That's always been a popular feature in the tabletop, and while it's kinda uninspired, it's likely to happen just purely because it's a feature. Also, it's very much a way for Creative Assembly to take the easy route when it comes to stuff like that. That being said, the best alternative here is a healthy mixture of the both, not only for Nurgle but for the other Chaos Gods too. But what do you guys think about the possible followers of Nurgle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.